Hey guys, I wanted to walk through the bread making process with you today. I have heard that a lot of y'all are making bread during this time or trying to make bread. It has been really hard to find yeast for the last month, but I'm really excited that my husband finally tracked some down. Bread flour has also been difficult to come by, although you do not absolutely have to have bread flour. All-purpose flour will work fine as well, especially for the recipe that we're making today, because I've tried it both ways. I've tried it with all-purpose and I've tried it with bread flour. And in this particular recipe, I did not notice a really big difference. So this recipe is coming to you from King Arthur Flour. I, just as a home baker, just average person, love King Arthur products, and I also love their website especially. You can depend on the recipes that they have there. I test a lot of recipes from a lot of different sources, but when I want something that I know will be a good, true recipe that will perform, especially when it comes to baked goods, I really like King Arthur Flour. Some recipes you will run across a bad recipe out there, but especially when it comes to something like bread making, everything really does have to come together in a certain way, and it needs to be a solid recipe. So this recipe is not something that I recommend that you make all in one day. Part of bread making is planning. If you want to have a loaf of fresh bread come out of your oven today, you really should have started yesterday. I know some of y'all might be disappointed in that, but plan ahead. It is totally worth it. But bread requires a lot of process. It requires fermentation, and in that time, that's when flavors really develop. And it's just really essential. Like, this recipe has a starter, and that's what I'm going to do for you today. And then tomorrow we'll come back and we'll put it all together. But I have to start this today if I want to have my bread tomorrow so that it can be doing its work. The recipe actually says you can just do it for 2 hours ahead. I really don't recommend that. I really do think that this starter needs overnight. And when I took my bread making class in culinary school, we had to be patient and go through some of these processes, and starters just take time. I would not rush them. The flavor is going to develop and be a lot nicer, especially if you're using all-purpose flour. You're going to want that extra time. So to make the starter, we are going to need 1 cup of lukewarm water, around 90 to 100 degrees. Your water temperature is going to be important, not so much in your starter, but when you're actually in the process of making bread. If you got your water too hot, you could kill the yeast. If it's not warm enough, it might not activate. So having a thermometer to test your water temperature in some particular bread recipes is very important. This one is actually not as important, so that's what makes it an easy, solid recipe, especially for us new bakers. So you're gonna want 1.5 cups of flour, all-purpose or bread. This is bread flour. And I'm putting this in this container because this container has a lid, and I like that. I'm gonna just put the lid on and set it aside, and it'll be ready tomorrow. But if you just have a bowl that you can put plastic wrap over, that's fine. You're gonna need 1/2 teaspoon of yeast, and you're gonna need your cup of water. And it's really simple. You're just gonna stir all this together. And it's not, I'm not sure what, if you have any expectation over what it should look like, but it's just gonna be a very wet, pasty kind of a mixture. And once you get that done, let me just scrape my spoon off. That's it. That is all there is to it. And now you're just going to put your lid on. I'll show you what the mixture looks like. It's just kind of a wet, pasty mix. And then I'm just gonna put this lid on, and I'm gonna set it aside, and then we'll come back tomorrow. Hey guys, I'm back. We're gonna keep working on the bread. We have our starter. It's been sitting for about 24 hours. You see what it looks like. It's not very cute, but it is delicious, and it makes all the difference in a really good bread. I've now made, this is my third batch of this particular recipe. Again, it's from King Arthur flour. It is called, of course I'm going to include it, but it is called French style country bread. So tonight we are going to have fresh bread. It's going to be delicious. It's probably going to be what we're going to have for dinner, is a slice of really good bread. So that's how we get carbs in around here. We try to just have one meal earlier in the day and then maybe have like a slice of this later and be done. So, little side note about eating bread, baking bread. I know most of y'all must be trying to make bread because you can't. We're still having a hard time finding flour and yeast. So I hope that you are using what you've all bought up and trying to make some recipes like this. So what I'm doing here is I'm stirring down the starter, and it's going into the bowl. And to our starter, I'm scraping it all out. Here. I'm going to add 3 3/4 cup of flour. I am actually using a mixture of bread flour and all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour has been easier to find than bread flour. And the first batch of this I made with all-purpose flour accidentally, and it turned out really well. And then we made the second batch with just bread flour, and I really could not tell that much of a difference. So I encourage you to do your own experimenting at home and see what you come up with. But again, it's just a testament to, if you can only find all-purpose flour, still try this recipe because it turns out really well. So to this, I'm adding a cup of lukewarm water. I'm adding a tablespoon of sugar. I'm adding 3/4 of a teaspoon of active yeast. And I'm adding 2 1/4 teaspoons of salt. I'm gonna roughly stir this together. And then we're gonna let it sit for 12 to 15 minutes is what the recipe says. And the reason why you do this is because it allows the flour, before you move on to the kneading stage, it allows the flour to hydrate, so you don't have to add as much flour. And it also, in the notes from King Arthur flour, it says that this helps for your bread to have more of the little bubbles, the holes inside of it that make bread so yummy. So I also wanted to say one thing about salt. If you ever forget to put salt in your bread, you're gonna be so sad. I've actually done that before. I recently made a batch of pita bread, totally forgot the salt, was so sad. When I was in culinary school, our professor actually forgot to put salt in a batch of the most beautiful French bread you've ever seen. Yeah, it was not great. Salt is so important. This recipe is interesting in that it suggests you put somewhere between 1 1/2 teaspoons and 2 1/4 teaspoons, I think. I go with the 2 1/4 teaspoons because salt is so important to bread dough. So I just wanted to give y'all that little tip. If you ever do it, you're gonna find out it's a very sad thing that you went through this whole process and accidentally forgot to put salt in your dough. So, like I said, we're gonna let this sit for 12 to 15 minutes, and then we will come back and I'll show you what the next step is. Okay, so now it's been like 15 minutes that our dough has kind of just rested to come together, and it's not very attractive right now, but now is the time that we can start kneading it. So I'm gonna use my bread hook here with my KitchenAid. If you don't have a KitchenAid, of course you can make bread. It's not that big of a deal. But if you do have a KitchenAid, it makes a big difference because it's just bread making and cookie making and all those things are just so much easier if you have a KitchenAid. This KitchenAid, some of y'all might be a little put off by the price tag. I know I was. But just so you know, this KitchenAid I received when I was expecting my daughter, who is now holding the camera. That Christmas is when I received this. And so that has now been, this last Christmas, that will be 20 years. 20 years that I've had this KitchenAid. And I'm sorry, 19 years? No, you're gonna be 20.
Are you saying this Christmas? Or,
no, this
because
last
it was
Christmas.
before
Yeah,
I was
so
born.
20 years. Yeah,
20
that's
years.
okay, 20 years. So just, you know, just it's just amazing. Like you can get them serviced. I know there's a place here in Dallas where you can get them serviced if you need to. I've never had to do that. I'm actually about ready to get my next one, and I'm feeling like confident enough to say, you know what, okay, I'm ready to pass this one on and get a new one soon. So hopefully that'll be happening. You can see here that this knob is missing. And yeah, I mean, it's not perfect. It's well loved, well used, and it's worth every penny. You can find them used. I would not be opposed to buying a used one, and definitely not a refurbished one. They're just solid. If you ever have to move them, it's kind of a pain because they're really heavy, and they definitely deserve a predominant spot in your kitchen where you don't have to move them around a lot. You can easily access it. So anyway, that's my little KitchenAid spill. Totally worth it. But now what we're going to do is we have our bread hook in, and we are going to knead this dough for about 10 minutes, and that's the beauty of the KitchenAid. You can actually start it, and it's literally going to run now for 10 minutes. You just have to keep your eye on it, and then I'll come back and we'll show you after 10 minutes what it looks like. Okay, I wanted to take a minute to show you guys. Can you show how it's sticking at the bottom? So while it's kneading, we have about 1/4 of a cup of flour left to play with. So you can see how at the bottom it's kind of holding on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit of flour like that, in the hopes that it will, that'll be just enough flour added to finish the dough and get it to where it needs to be. So, yeah. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes and we are ready. I feel like I could have added a little bit more flour. I did add the other 1/4 of a cup of flour. It's a little bit sticky, but since I have made this dough already, this is my 3rd time making it, I'm not going to add any more flour because I know it's going to be fine. So, but I did add that extra 1/4 of a cup. In bread making, the humidity, the dryness, it will play into your bread making, and that's just something that you learn the more that you bake. And whenever you find a good recipe like this one and you let it become part of your regular cooking and baking, the more you become familiar with it, the more you'll be able to tweak it and know what works best. So this tool is a scraper. I did not know about scrapers like this until I took my baking classes, but it's a really good thing to have. I think this one was $1. I do not like to have a lot of unnecessary gadgets in my kitchen. I don't do it. Things that I keep in my drawers are things that I use regularly. I do not crawl over a bunch of stuff that I never use to get to the things that I really do use, and I recommend that you take a minute if you have very cluttered drawers. An obstacle to cooking a lot in your kitchen could be that you just are tired of digging through stuff to get to the things that you really need. So that is an important part of cooking, is being able to get your hands on the things that you need when you need them, like your scraper. Scraper is really great because it gets all the dough out of the bowl, and it also cleans up everything really nicely. I'm going to spray this other bowl with spray, so cooking spray. You could also just use some olive oil or whatever to oil the bowl. But I'm going to scrape my dough into the bowl. I'm going get all this dough out with my scraper. And I'm going to show you how clean it leaves the bowl when you do that. And then I'm going to take my dough and I'm going to give it one toss so that the oil coats both sides. And then we're going to cover it with plastic wrap or a tea towel, or just whatever towel you have. And it's going to need to sit, again, depending on the warmth, the temperature, the time of year. This is going to take 1 to 2 hours to puff. It doesn't necessarily have to double, but you definitely want it to increase and rise and get puffy. So that's going to take 1 to 2 hours. All right, so it has been about an hour and a half, and you can see that the bread has gotten puffy, and it's probably not quite doubled, but it's definitely in a good place. So I'm gently, I do not want to knock all of the air out of this dough. Some recipes, some bread recipes will have you punch it down or do different things. This recipe does not ask you to do that. But you do have to bring it together and get it ready to move on to your baking sheet. So I am sprinkling my baking sheet with cornmeal, and that's just going to keep it from sticking to the bottom. And then I'm going to gather up my dough, and we are just going to gently place it onto the cornmeal, and it is quite sticky, as you can see. And we're just going to put it right there on the cornmeal, and now it has to rest and rise again for 45 to 90 minutes. And the reason why we haven't messed with it too much and done some of the things that you do in other bread making at this step, like, you know, form it into a ball or something, work with it a little bit more, is because, again, we are trying to achieve all of those nice holes that get inside like a good French bread. And so the less that we work with it at this point, then the nicer the end product is going to be. So from here, you can either cover this with plastic wrap that has been oiled, but I am again going to use my tea towel so I don't have to use plastic wrap, because I'm always trying to not use so much plastic in my kitchen. I'm going to just spray it again, and then I'm going to lay my tea towel over the top like that, and then we're going to come back in probably about 45 minutes and do the next step. Okay, so it's been about another hour that the bread has been rising, so now it is ready. We are about 30 minutes away from home baked bread. We are going to slash the bread either with a really sharp paring knife. This is a little knife from IKEA that was very inexpensive. I think it might have been $2. It's very sharp. And or you can use a lame if you want to be really professional. I suggest you look up a lame. It's a very scary looking object with like a razor blade on it that is what we used in school, but a really sharp little paring knife is perfect, and it's multifunctional. So again, you don't have to have one object for one purpose taking up space in your drawer when a good sharp paring knife works as well. So I'm just going to very quickly and confidently slash the bread, and this allows the bread to release its gases, and as it's baking it will need to release some of the as it's risen and it's produced gases inside, it's going to need a way to release some of that. Otherwise it might have some bursts or things in a way that is not controlled, that you might not like the way the finished product looks, although it'll still be good. But that's why we do that, in a very non-technical explanation of why we do that. The recipe also suggests that you dust the top with flour. The first time that I did it, the first time I tried the recipe, I did do that, and I'm not sure why they asked you to do that. The second time I didn't do that, and I was happier with the result. So again, I'm not going to dust the top with flour. I don't think it's necessary, but you can certainly try that if you want. Also, It's important, an important part of this recipe is preheating the oven to 475. So I have my oven preheated to 475. I did that a few minutes before we started the video, so it'd be nice and hot. We're gonna spray the oven with the water bottle, and that helps it to form that really nice crust. Professional bakers have steam ovens, but you can recreate to some extent a steam oven at home if you use a spray bottle. So you're gonna need to spray the oven for the first 15 minutes regularly. So what I'm gonna do is every 3 minutes, I'm not gonna show you on the video, but every 3 minutes I'm gonna open the oven and I'm going to spray it a few times. And this is a good time for you if there's something that you need to clean in the kitchen or some other task, but you're gonna need to stay around this area and keep spraying down the oven if you want to have a good result. And then the last 15 or 20 minutes as it finishes, and it probably will just be 15 minutes according to the other two that we baked before. Right at about 30 minutes it's done. That last 15 minutes or so you should not need to spray the oven anymore. So here we are. We need to turn, also at this point before I put it in, it's time to turn the oven down. So we preheated it to 475, but now we're gonna turn it down to 425. So, $425, in the bread goes. Give it a few sprays in there. And then I'm gonna give it a few minutes and I'll be spraying again. All right, after much patience, we are finally finished with our bread. I took it out of the oven. It actually did not take 30 minutes. It took 22 minutes. So bread can be tricky to tell when it's done. The more that you bake, the better you'll get at that. You can use an instant thermometer that you insert into the bread that looks like this. You can buy one of these, a digital thermometer, and you can test by that. In school, we were taught to tap, and when it sounds hollow, when you get like a nice hollow sound, that's when you know that it's ready. So now we have this bread. I'm going to cut us a piece. Also, having a good bread knife, if you're going to be baking bread at home, you're going to discover really quickly that you need a good, sharp, serrated bread knife. This one is by, I think they're called Cutco knives. They're a little bit pricey, but I will tell you that this knife was worth the money that I spent on it. It is very sharp. I've almost taken off the end of my finger with it. I call it a katana sword, and tried to scare my children to death of it, so that they know to be very respectful and cautious if they ever attempt to use this knife. It's very, very sharp, but it's sharp because it works, and it works so well. So having a good bread knife is essential when you bake bread, so that you can cut through the bread. And you can see our end result. It's still a little bit warm. It's been cooling for about probably close to 30 minutes. And I'm still, even with this sharp knife, that bottom is nice and crunchy. So, but you can see how lovely the bread turned out. This bread is very tasty. Again, you've heard me say several times, this is the third time that I'm making this recipe. I will provide you with the link at King Arthur Flour. If you are a beginning baker, this is a really good bread for you to attempt to make. But just remember, you're gonna need time, you're gonna need patience. You're not gonna be able to make it in the same day. You need to start it the day before, but it is well worth the effort and the time that you put into it to bake yourself a fresh, homemade bowl of bread.